It's NBA trade deadline day. The day is finally here. What are the latest updates on the Charlotte Hornets? We'll talk about all of that today on Locked On Hornets.
You are Locked On Hornets, your daily Charlotte Hornets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
It's Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcast, and that includes YouTube. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. As always, we appreciate Prize Picks for helping us out as they do constantly. This episode being brought to you by Prize Picks means that it's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. You can go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. That's Doug Branson. You can find his work on his Substack, everyhornetsboxscore.com. I'm Walker Mail. You can listen to me on WFNZ every weekday from 12 to 3 p.m. Is it a good sign or a bad sign on deadline day that my light keeps going in and out and it's just kind of flashing above me? I don't know what that means. It brings me back to draft day when your lights kept going out and we were all very sad to see what transpired with Mitch Kupchak trading a first-round pick because they just didn't want as many young players at that time. I don't know what this light being finicky means. Do you have any ideas?
On or off? Are they going to do something? Are they not going to do something? I think the uncertainty, we're living in this sort of liminal space. I think all of us are exhausted by this. We're ready for some kind of certainty. Certainly Clifford sounded exhausted by all of this after another loss to the Raptors. He just wants to know who his GD team is so that they can go out and try to figure something out the rest of the way. I think that's where I won't speak for everyone, but that's where I sit. I'm ready to get through this deadline day and find out what's going to happen.
Let's start with Miles Bridges. I think Miles, after back-to-back 40-point games, had never scored 40 before, gets a career high, and then gets another 40-point game on top of that before the possibility of him being traded actually occurs. And so after that, let's go to Brian Windhorst on the Hoop Collective pod. This was before yesterday's game against Toronto. Brian Windhorst said on the Hoop Collective, there's a good chance that the Hornets are going to move Miles Bridges. There's a lot of different interest in him. He will be presented with options, and he will get to pick one if it comes to that. Okay, so then he scores another 40-burger. That happens. And now Adrian Wojnarowski on his very own Woj pod says, I think Miles Bridges loves playing for Steve Clifford. I think those two have connected. Steve Clifford has done a remarkable job with the players he has at his disposal this year. The bench in Charlotte, I'm not sure all those guys are in the NBA next year anywhere, like all of them. He also said, I think it's very, very likely that Miles Bridges is back with Charlotte past the deadline, and it looks like the Hornets might try to re-sign him. So we've done a complete 180. We've done a complete 180 here with Miles, and we're back in a circle. I have no clue anymore. I used to think that they were going to trade him. It wasn't a bold take, but it was, a prediction that it's always going to be more likely that nothing happens than that something happens. But now I truly have zero clue. And I guess with the latest thing that we get here from Woj and the way that Steve Clifford talked about him yesterday, I'm guessing Miles Bridges is back on the Hornets roster by the time we do this next episode here, Doug.
Yeah, because I think what's going on right now is that if they, off of these 40-point games and off of what they're selling Miles Bridges as to these teams, whether it be Phoenix or Dallas or LA, they're essentially saying, look, give us a unprotected first rounder, give us a young player. They want the big deal if they're going to part with Miles Bridges, because otherwise, and they're probably telling teams this, look, you either do that, we're not going to take pennies on the dollar. You either do that or we're just going to try to re-sign him. He loves playing with Steve Clifford. He's loved playing in Charlotte. Him and LaMelo are buddies. Even though he's going to be an unrestricted free agent, I feel like Charlotte feels like they're going to have the inside track on re-signing him. Even though those negotiations broke down last offseason, they broke down because they were fresh off of felony domestic violence charges. With all of that in the rearview mirror, if it remains in the rearview mirror, Charlotte probably feels like, look, we can take this into a retool, not a rebuild, and pick up some assets for PJ Washington and re-sign Miles Bridges. And that, look, honestly, like if they could do that, if they pull all of that off and LaMelo remains healthy and Brandon keeps ascending, that is the quickest path to some kind of, retool that doesn't depend on some magical scenario where they trade 3 or 4 first rounders for, an all-star rental.
Miles Bridges now, especially with the Steve Clifford thing, Doug, Woj mentions it, and we've seen Steve Clifford appear on the Woj pod before. I think Steve Clifford has a good rapport with like basketball media. He loves talking ball with a bunch of guys that know the game. I remember going back and when we were talking with Jake Fisher, and he had the comments about Steve Clifford's uncertainty on whether he would be back, but that the notion was that Mitch Kupchak was going to be gone. And now here's Woj talking about how Steve and Miles have developed this relationship, with Steve also telling you that he loves the way that Miles plays and that he's, gives his effort 100% of the time, and he's out there playing 38, 39 minutes. Is Steve Clifford going to be back next year? Like, is it fair to ask that question? I think now we are at least opening the door. The foot is in the door before you can fully close it, based off of a couple of comments that we've heard from basketball insiders. No, I'm not telling you that's a foregone conclusion by any stretch of the imagination. I used to just think it was a foregone conclusion he was gone. Now, I think there's an actual possibility that Steve Clifford might come back, and they view – I talked with Nick Smith Jr. yesterday. Nick Smith Jr. said that Steve Clifford was the best coach he's ever had. Look, maybe the players don't play defense for him. Maybe that's true.
But is and that's the question, right? Because Clifford last night after the game against Toronto, where defensive failures were the reason that they blew that lead in the second half, he goes in front of the microphones and says, look, you brought me in to, get this team to play better defense, and I have failed. But you really, and I'm sure all the Fire Clifford anistas were listening to that and going, yeah, exactly, he failed. But if you listen to all of his comments over the course of the season, he's been pretty clear about the role of coaching and the role of roster building and how those two work together. And essentially, I think Clifford falls along this idea, this sort of Bill Parcellsian idea of my coaching abilities sort of start and end where your ability to give me players that I can coach starts, right? If you give me players that will play defense, then I can get them to play maximum defense. But if you give me players that are not going to play defense, that sometimes play defense, that sometimes, like PJ Washington, they'll sometimes rebound, and then sometimes they'll just watch a guy get an offensive rebound on multiple possessions. If that's the kind of players you're going to give me, then this is the result. I can't wave a magic wand and make them play defense all the time, make them get back in transition. And so, I think if the Hornets ownership group, if they're rational actors, they have to look at this situation. They have to look at this season and go, it was cursed. The roster hasn't been right. It wasn't just about this season. It hasn't been right for a long time in terms of building a group of players that are willing and capable of doing it on both ends of the floor. This has been a team that was built from the jump to play well offensively and to maybe play defense. And so that's going to be the challenge. And so, I'm totally with you. I could see this team sticking with Clifford for another season because he's not expensive and they don't have to spend any more money there. And they can, make spectrum upgrades and they can make practice facility upgrades and they can do all that. And they get to save a little cheddar on the coaching position.
So, maybe it was just wrong of me to just assume that they were going to move on from Steve Clifford. It's still obviously a great possibility, but perhaps it's 50-50. I don't know.
He hasn't lost the locker room. Look, that's why coaches get fired. If Nick Smith Jr. and LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller and Miles Bridges, they have endured loss after loss after loss. If all of those guys got together in the locker room and said, we don't like this guy anymore, he would have already been gone. They would have already fired him. But that hasn't happened.
It hasn't. What a turnaround, man. What an absolute what a turnaround for Cliff. He's back. Dude, screw it. He's coming back. You can't kill this guy. He stays in the haunted house and he's trying to fix it up. He's a ghost.
I feel bad for him. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't have like high expectations for the rest of his tenure here, and maybe I hope I hope I'm wrong about that. Obviously, but yeah, I feel a little guilty here saying he's going to stay because I think he's going to endure more pain before it gets better.
Oh, if he gets out of this alive, then we need to call him the Ghostbuster after buying the haunted house and then getting this roster to play well enough. And then you see the other side of this. Steve Clifford, the ghost busting coach.
Well, they've called him twice. You know, who are you going to call? They've called him twice.
Steve Clifford. I ain't afraid of no bad basketball. All right, let's move on. Steve Clifford's coming back. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
All right.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
More jingles about Steve Clifford, and then we can move on to PJ Washington, some of the latest rumors surrounding him. That's coming up next on Locked On Hornets. This episode is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes. Class exclusive Google built-in is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. And gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch high-definition touchscreen informant system. That sounds like it's from the future. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect mid-size crossover for your next adventure. And there's also the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder that has room for up to 8 people. An expensive cargo capacity, not expensive, get that out of your head, expansive cargo capacity, and advanced available 4x4 capability. You also have the 2024 Nissan Armada, plenty of cars to choose from. That will change what you expect from a full-size SUV. You can tow bigger and explore further in the 2024 Armada. Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. More Locked On Hornets ahead. Let's focus on the PJ Washington rumors here, Doug. And really, for the most part, it's surrounding one team. It's all Dallas watch right now. And really, it's all about Josh Green. Apparently, the Mitch Kupchak and the Hornets, they're asking for a protected first and Josh Green for PJ Washington. It feels like Mitch Kupchak is going out swinging, Doug. This is what he does. If he does not feel like he overwhelmingly wins the trade, then he will not make it. And this is something that he's trying to do, whereas it all signs do point to Mitch Kupchak being gone. Even if Steve Clifford comes back, we still feel pretty good about Mitch Kupchak not coming back next season. But if he's able to pull off Josh Green and a protected first, because Dallas, they're in the play-in tournament right now, and that is not a team that should be in the play-in tournament with Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving on your roster. I'm sure Mavs fans are putting their feet to the fire. Jason Kidd has some pressure. That whole team has pressure. Maybe you can get that from them, Doug. What are your latest thoughts on PJ Washington rumors?
I don't think it's unreasonable either. And because the other deal is Rashawn Holmes and an unprotected first. And so I don't think the Hornets are being unreasonable here. They're saying, look, you want this player. You didn't go. Listen, you had the opportunity to go after him in free agency, and you chose the wrong guy. That's your fault, not our fault. And so now you want the guy that you could have had in free agency, and you're going to have to pay for him. And you're either going to have to do unprotected and Rashawn Holmes, or give us the better player, but we still want a first-round pick. And I don't think that's unreasonable. And listen, if Dallas wants to burn down their playoff hopes, that's on them. But the Hornets should not back off and say, okay, well, we'll put more protection on the first-round pick. We'll put more because, I'm usually like get the deal done guy, but with this situation, it's like, look, you had this opportunity and you are in it's not as if Dallas were like a 3 or 4 seed right now, then I would be like, listen, Hornets, get the deal done, make them a little better, move on. But they should be desperate, and if they're going to act irrationally, then I don't know what there is that you can do about that.
Well, and so Zach Lowe joked on the Low Post podcast that PJ Washington has been the most mentioned name on that podcast for no good reason, which, as much as I like PJ, our podcast should be mentioning him a lot, not a national NBA podcast, because he's always the guy thrown into hypothetical trade rumors where, hey, we need a 3-and-D style forward that can play small. You need versatility, right? We need the utility guy that can go in there and do a lot of what you ask of him. And they've talked about that with the Oklahoma City Thunder. I know that was a team that was mentioned a lot, at least on the Low Post. But here we are with Dallas, where the Grant Williams experiment just hasn't worked right, at least yet. And then so now you go after PJ. Yeah, man, you're gonna have to pay up. And just like as a general rule, I know it doesn't necessarily work out like this, but I would say they hit on PJ Washington as a first round pick, like varying levels of hit. No, he's not a star. He'll never be an all-star, but I think he was certainly, I'm not like regretting that selection. There are probably players that you could have selected behind him that were better. That's true. But PJ was not a miss. And if you don't miss on a first round pick, then I would like a first round pick in return if you're just going to trade that guy. Right? Like, I understand that different things matter and more at different times, cap space, draft assets, young reclamation projects. But I would like to get a first round pick if you had a first round pick that worked out for you and you're going to trade that thing out.
Well, and the thing, too, is that he doesn't become, if they don't get a deal done at this deadline, PJ Washington doesn't become untradeable.
And that's, I think, the biggest point. That's the biggest point where this is not something that, oh, we better trade PJ now or you're going to lose him for nothing. No, man, you got him on a good contract for the next 2 years. Very, very tradable contract. And he might just have more value. Well, we just did this with Terry. Do we not just see this happen with Terry where you couldn't trade him? You didn't just settle for pennies on the dollar and go for multiple seconds. No, you held out. And yeah, it's a much, much distant future pick in 2027, 28, but you got a first round pick. So like, you don't have to do that. That's the best point. That's the most important one, in my opinion.
Yeah. And it is probably going to be another name trading him at that point. It won't be Mitch Kupchak. So yeah, I hope he does hold out for the deal. And obviously, really, when we talk about Mitch Kupchak, we're really talking about the ownership group too, right? Because if their intention is to move on from this guy after the deadline, then I would hope that any deal that comes across their desk, they're taking a hard look at and making some approval of. So that's what we're really talking about here. But yeah, I think that's the point, that PJ Washington becomes more tradable as you go into this next offseason. And so you would hope that they get the best deal here. Meanwhile, get a freaking rebound, PJ. I mean, geez Louise. I mean, PJ. I think, I hope it's like I'm torn. I'm like your light. I'm on and I'm off, because part of me is like, make sure you maximize value for PJ Washington, because there's a team that absolutely needs some of what he brings. And I think the Hornets, honestly, as a team, would be better off without him, because I think, to me, he is the poster child for what Clifford was lamenting in that press conference. The sometimes player, the player, when it comes down to it, when the game is on the line, will not step in front of Jakob Poeltl, will not step in front of Thaddeus Young, for God's sakes, and get a rebound, hit somebody, be physical, care about what it takes to actually win a basketball game. Just because your shot isn't going in doesn't mean you don't have to give 100% effort in every other category. It's just like, it's truly mind-numbing, and I know he's your guy, and so, I feel honestly like I'm just like insulting your kid at this point, but it's just like
insulting the kid. It's just, no, like PJ did play like a guy that might get traded yesterday, and it was funny to hear those comments that you bring up, Steve Clifford. Like, everybody was pointing at Miles when he brought up those comments, and then Steve Clifford comes back and says Miles gives all this effort. And Miles is the guy, like, he even mentions the after timeout play. He says the after timeout play is the after timeout play. And then Miles just goes hero ball after the inbound pass. And like,
that's all true. And Clifford's right about that. And Clifford, is careful in saying, like, I'm not trying to blame Miles, but he is blaming Miles for the hero ball stuff. But here's the thing. let LaMelo Ball be out there. Miles isn't going hero ball like that. You know what I'm saying? Like, if there's a decent point guard out there, and this is part of the problem, this team has not had point guard depth, and they had an opportunity to have point guard depth at the beginning of this season and decided, nah, we're just going to just chance it with a guy who has had several ankle injuries. We're not going to have any point guard depth. And so, yes, he is playing hero ball, but if they decide to keep him, then get some point guard depth, get LaMelo Ball 100% healthy, because Miles Bridges is playing like a guy that doesn't trust his teammates. And I don't know that many people watching are going, well, I blame him for that, because, look at what did Woj say? All these bench guys are not even going to be in the NBA, except for, probably Nick Smith Jr. He hangs around. But, this bench is putrid.
He said,
so, do you blame him for going hero ball?
Yeah, no, and PJ, look, man, the reason I defend PJ all the time
I'm on one, man. I'm sorry.
You said what?
I said I'm on one right now. I'm sorry.
No, you are. No, and that's okay. But the thing about PJ, it's like when I would see people talk about his inconsistency, and then they would love Kelly Oubre, and then they would talk about bad defense, and then they would say PJ needs to go out there. And I'm not saying he's OG Anunoby. What I'm telling you is, I'm tired of seeing him have to take care of other people's mistakes out on the perimeter because nobody can keep in front of the ball. And then so that's what makes PJ have to try to affect everybody. He has to leave his guy constantly. And then I do like him dribbling attacking closeouts, and his closeouts. Miles Bridges will just fly by you on the perimeter, or at least PJ will chop his feet and put a hand in your face. And so you're right. Defensive rebounding, that's a glaring issue because it's just easier to see for basketball evaluators. Oh, PJ's there. He didn't box out, and he's not good at it. And so that's a glaring thing. My problem is when everybody else gets attacked, including PJ, and it's man, look, PJ out there on the perimeter, having to leave everybody to cover for everybody else's mistakes. That's where I think he gets a raw deal because everybody else is so bad at keeping ball in front of them.
I kind of agree with you to an extent, but here's the problem.
Yeah.
The NBA, that's what the NBA is defensively at this point. The NBA is all about rotation and covering.
No, the Hornets are way worse at keeping ball. There's a reason, Dennis Smith Jr., when he was here last year, Dennis Smith Jr. helped them because he can keep the ball in front. It's not like that.
Look at the transit. I'm just telling you, there have been moments last season too, the Cleveland game, where he missed the offensive rebound or missed a defensive rebounding opportunity. Offensive rebound led to losing the game. Yeah. Look at the transition play at the end of the third quarter where the guy misses the layup and everybody stands around and watches it. And, all PJ has to do in that situation is hit a guy and go get a rebound, and he doesn't do it. I'm sorry. I don't buy into it. It happens too much for me to buy into it.
Yeah, because he's not perfect. No, right. When he scored the 40-point burger, you were like, well, he screwed this up in the fourth. And that's what happens. When he scored 40 points, you were like, oh, you know what? He was too worried scoring points, and he didn't get this rebound. I was like, that's the thing about
that's a major problem with this team generally. That was a problem with Brandon Miller last night. Honestly, if we're being honest about it, his defense was terrible in the fourth quarter. And people get in the comments and say, well, I'm nitpicking his defense. It's just watch the game. Brandon Miller's defense, he's looking for a shot. He's falling in love with 30-point games, and he's not playing defense. That is what it is. I think everyone needs to have a reality check, and I'm just ready. I'm ready for this trade deadline to be over so that the Hornets can sort of know what the team is going to be constructed as, and then they can move forward with that. And then hopefully in this next offseason, they address some of the glaring issues that have plagued this team for many years, and move forward with a roster that actually has a legitimate chance to compete in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think you are ready for this team to be done. I'm with you, though. I'm right there on the same page. Let's move on. Last segment coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
Maybe we even talk a little bit more about the game, PJ Washington's problems, everybody else's problems also on this roster, and what happened last night after they had the lead and then they relinquished it to Toronto, and then maybe give our final trade deadline thoughts coming up in the last segment. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. It's demon time on Prize Picks. That's right. You can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn 10 into $1,000. Demons and goblins are the newest and most exciting way to play at Prize Picks. Squares marked with red demons or green goblins gets you different payouts. You can now win up to 100 times your money, 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. It's daily fantasy sports, and it's just you against the numbers. You pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and then you can watch the winnings roll on in. Make sure you go check out Prize Picks as soon as you can. prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. More Locked On Hornets ahead. All right, Doug, if I went to Every Hornets box score, just give me your first thoughts on what happened last night. What would I find on this write-up against Toronto?
Well, if you went to Every Hornets box score, you wouldn't find my thoughts. I had to get a sub last night,
Okay.
So not Edwards stepped in, but I can give you a few of his thoughts if you'd like. We just sort of have a ghost Nada show.
Sure, we can have a Ghost Nada show. We can talk about his thoughts and then whether you agree with them or not. What are you thinking?
Well, now I got to pull it up. I wasn't totally prepared for this, so why don't you give me your thoughts and then I will get Nada's thoughts.
That was another way of me asking, what did you think? I will give you my thoughts on this, though. And so
I think I've voiced plenty of what I think on this show so far.
That's true.
I think I've been pretty outrageous.
No, Miles Bridges last night, he's playing like a man that keeps telling you he wants to stay in Charlotte, and he's playing like he wants to stay in Charlotte. You see what he did offensively in back-to-back games, 45 points, and then it was really Cody Martin at the beginning of this one. He had 19, and I believe his career high is 21, and he scored 19, and he actually did that early. So he really helped him out too. Like that sequence from Brandon Miller needs to be touched on, where he had the defensive play coming back and blocking a shot in transition and then coming back down and then hitting a top of the key doesn't do it justice. A like distance 35-footer 3-pointer. That was a ridiculous sequence from Brandon Miller. And so you had those guys all show up for the most part last night. And all of them. And they still fell short because in the fourth quarter, like in clutch time, they just jacked up 4 of some of the more horrific clutch shots that we've seen. Nick Angstad also tweeted about that. And it was those shots and some of the fourth quarter execution or lack thereof that they scored 20 points to Toronto's 32 and ended up losing this one.
Yeah, because right now the Hornets are messing around, trying to get a win, but not really trying to get a win as they head into the trade deadline. But they are getting a little bit better, and that was one of Nada's takes for Locked On Hornets in the Every Hornets box score write-up. He says this team is probably closer to winning meaningless games after the All-Star break. Once players feel settled about not being traded or waived, they get into a rhythm. They are making, over the past couple of games, you go to Lakers game, you go to these past couple of games, and you can see little improvements. They're not getting totally blown out of the water, which was the case at the beginning of this losing streak. Nada also writes, if the Miles Bridges era in Charlotte ends tomorrow, it will be one of the most complicated discussions ever about a Charlotte professional athlete, and that's an incredibly high bar to climb.
I love that Nada gets the pen and then he brings the fire to it. That is totally Nada the Scribe that you can find on Twitter. Yeah, and so with this loss, you've seen Steve Clifford have to answer so many questions on the deadline. Today, the way they're operating is I think they have individual workouts. They're not going to have team practice. The players are going to be able to do really whatever they want to, get some shots up, go work out themselves, and then they're going to have their you said what?
Pack a bag.
Yeah, maybe pack a bag. Maybe pack a bag for some of these guys. And do you think PJ ends up getting traded?
Yes.
Do you think that ends up? I do too now. Because do you feel like also last night that we got a little bit of the Terry Rozier effect where I saw a bunch on my timeline where it's like, okay, PJ's playing like he's going to get traded, just like we saw with Terry when he was going to get traded to playing against Minnesota? Or you're saying you've seen those? You're going to say you've seen those mistakes too often to say that.
Well, it's difficult to tell, right? Yeah, it was easy to tell with Terry because he doesn't often play like that. With PJ, it not just offensively too. I mean, the roller. He's been the roller coaster guy. It's been up, it's been down. And so, I hope that any officials of the Dallas Mavericks are not paying attention to Locked On Hornets podcast. Maybe we should have gotten on here and been like gassing them up a little bit. I don't know. But that's been the experience of PJ Washington this entire time. And so, no, I wasn't thinking that. But at the same time, I do think that all of this trade chatter has affected this team. There's just no doubt about it. And I wonder, had they kept Terry and waited till the deadline to do a Miami deal, if it would have been different. Because then there would have, without the Terry deal, there would have been like a mood of, yeah, they might do something, they might not, but they might just hold this thing and go, we'll try again for one more year. But once the Terry deal happened, then it was obvious. Everybody was like, all right, that was the heart and soul of your team is gone. Mm-hmm. We just ripped that out. So obviously you're going to make some changes. And so I think that's weighing on everyone, including Clifford, including Bridges, including PJ, the entire team. And on top of that, you don't have your best player in LaMelo Ball out on the floor. So, all of that I think are stressors. And that's how you blow a lead like that to a team in Toronto that you are better than. Even without LaMelo Ball, Charlotte was better than that. And they had a chance to beat RJ Barrett. That guy gets under my skin from all those losses to New York. They had a chance to beat Barrett, and they couldn't do it.
No, they could not. And so we will see what happens at the trade deadline today. So I guess final thoughts. We both think Miles is going to stay now. We both think PJ Washington will be traded. We haven't mentioned Gordon Hayward or Kyle Lowry in this. Don't think anybody's going to trade for Kyle Lowry. That looks like a buyout candidate for sure. And then with Gordon Hayward, any thoughts on Gordon? Like, do you think he eventually is going to be a Charlotte Hornet?
I think more likely than not. Although the last guy that said he loved Charlotte and wanted to stay here is in Philadelphia right now. That's right. Kelly Oubre. So it could be the kiss of death if you say you want to stay in Charlotte. Although Miles says he wants to stay in Charlotte. Every time he's asked, to Miles' credit, you're given those opportunities to make noise. You're given those opportunities in front of a microphone to blow up trade talks and make things more difficult. And he hasn't taken those opportunities. He has been very down the line. I want to stay in Charlotte. I'm committed to this organization. But with Hayward, yeah, I think he's more likely here than not. And especially, look, if he was questionable going into this game, was declared out late. If he's healthy and can bring a little bit more playmaking and give LaMelo Ball more time to get that ankle healthy, money's coming off the books. I don't know that would necessarily be a bad thing because certainly they're not getting a first rounder for Gordon Hayward. That's going to be a second rounder and a bag of chips.
Well, they're asking for it. And yes, that doesn't mean they're going to get it.
They're asking for it. They ain't going to get it.
Right. Yep. You fell right into my trap. Yes, that does mean that does not mean they're going to get it. But it is a report from Ian Begley, who, by the way, is saying at least one team. Ian Begley covers the Knicks and the Nets. Who are the teams that are looking to contend? It's the Knicks. And Ian Begley is telling you there's at least one team that they have been asked of one of their first round picks. And that's with Charlotte. And I would imagine it's the Knicks. And so Ian Begley says Charlotte is a team to keep an eye on the buyout market. They had been asking at least one team for a first round pick in exchange for Gordon Hayward. If they don't get that, it's possible that Hayward is bought out. Same goes for Kyle Lowry. So I don't know about the buyout situation. I'm not sure that's going to happen. And then if you go to Rod Boone, who also wrote about Gordon Hayward missing another game, Steve Clifford did tell you that he is close to returning as far as his health is concerned. But he did write about Gordon Hayward and the chances that he might stay as well. And it looks like those chances that he could be gone. It looks 50-50 right now. So we'll see what happens with Gordon. Lots of movement could come our way.
And you'll be on the radio if something happens. I'll be sort of standing by to go live on YouTube with some analysis from the Locked On Hornets perspective, and then you and I will jump back on tomorrow morning to kind of break down everything that happened again. But just set your notifications to on. I'll be back on, hopefully a little less surly. I'm sorry. I just want to apologize for my surliness. This trade deadline has gotten to me. I need some more coffee. I need to get hydrated, and I'll be ready to go live, maybe with a cheerier disposition.
It's okay, man. You're good. It gets us sometimes. It can break us down. I got into a real unnecessary fight yesterday, a sports fight about Brock Purdy and with Wes Bryant. So I think this time is it's really messing with all of us. It's Super Bowl week and it's NBA trade deadline day. Like I'm getting in sports fights all over the place, and then I get home and then I'm just like, dude, why am I arguing about Brock Purdy? Please save me from this profession. That'll do it for Locked On Hornets. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free and available anywhere you get your podcast, and that includes YouTube. Go check out Doug on his Substack and Nada on Doug's Substack, everyhornetsboxscore.com. David Walker on there too. You never know who you're going to read. Everyhornetsboxscore.com. Listen to me on the radio, Sports Radio 92.7 WFNZ every weekday from 12 to 3 p.m. on Wes and Walker. Have a great trade deadline day. We'll be back with you tomorrow for some updates, maybe Doug with some emergency pods, and then you can tune in to WFNZ for some of that breakdown as well. We'll see you tomorrow.